Hi, welcome to Explora. My name is Ava, and this is Lyric.
Hi everybody, welcome again to another episode of our Make at Home series. For this episode, we're gonna be making biscochitos. So this is a classic cookie to New Mexico. And so our twists on it, our investigation we're doing, we followed the same processes we had for the other one. We designed, we built, we baked, we did make improvements. We made improvements because our first batch, you make mistakes sometimes, right? After that, after you test it, and then we made improvements. So yeah, design, build, test, and improve. And so for the element we experimented with the fat in our biscochitos. And so we did use the classic lard, the classic manteca, and then we used vegetable oil, and we also used butter. And this was really interesting for me. I've always made it with the classic lard here, so it was really cool to see the difference. And so we're gonna walk through with you guys today. And so we have the ingredients here. As you can see, we're not gonna be making it in front of you guys. We're just gonna be looking at the dough and seeing the difference between them. So we have all the ingredients here. And when you're mixing it, take notice of, try different oils and see what you notice is different while you're even mixing it. You'll definitely wanna make sure you do the dry ingredients in one bowl and the wet ingredients in another. The recipe will be attached to this that we used. It's the recipe my family uses. So please share with us your recipe too as well if you want down in the comments. So for the dry ingredients, I have all of them here. The cinnamon and sugar, we did not use till the end though. We used the sugar with the wet ingredients in this case. But so here are the dry ingredients. The cinnamon and the sugar you'll use at the very end to dip. That's what we did. Some people put it on before, whichever works. What we did was we did the sugar and the cinnamon together. But besides that, these all mix together in a bowl. You whisk it really well. And then you have your wet ingredients. The sugar we just mix in with the wet ingredients because that's just how it mixes good that way. And so we added all this. We used milk for ours. I know a lot of people use different liquids for theirs. And then the fat varies, right? So that's just the element we changed for that. And then the anise. Some of you might use extract. We use the seed in this case. And this we waited till the very end after we've mixed. We did the dry, we did the wet, we combined them, and then we add the anise at the very end. And I think that's about all I have before I pass it over to Ava here. And she's going to give you the breakdown. She's going to explain to you what our process was like using the different fats in our biscochitos.
Okay, so like Lyric was saying, we experimented with the different types of fats, and today we're going to be rolling each of the doughs out to show you the differences that we found in each of the doughs while making them. Before you start rolling your dough, you're always going to want to put just a little pinch of flour down on your board and just spread it around.
So it's not too sticky.
Yeah, just so the dough does not stick to the pan. And then we're going to put it down and also put a little bit of flour on your rolling pin. And then we're just going to start rolling it out. This might be a little harder just because it was in the freezer or in the fridge for overnight. But it shouldn't be as difficult when you guys are first making it.
And the process while we were making this one, I typically, we have different ways of mixing, so maybe even try different ways of mixing. That's a good part you can experiment with as well. I use my hands typically, like I'll start with like a spoon, but then get into it with my hands when we're mixing the wet and the dry ingredients together. And so what was our experience like with this one, Ava, when we started?
When we started, it was very, very wet, and we had to mix a lot more flour into the batch to make everything even and consistent.
Right.
It's all about getting the consistency rather than all about the measurements. If you need to add a little bit more flour, add a little bit more flour.
Right.
If it looks fine with the amount of flour you already put in, then keep it just like that.
Yes. So as I said before, the recipe will be attached. But like Ava was saying, we as I'm mixing with my hands, that's a good indicator to me. Once it stops sticking to my hands so much, it won't be super sticky and just super globbed on. It's a good indicator of when you're done, when it's ready to be rolled and cut. So like she was saying, while I was mixing with my hands, she was slowly adding in flour for me till it got to that filling. So although there's these exact measurements, right, that's definitely like the improvement process you can add into it, because we tested it, right? We're like, it's still sticky. What adjustment can we make?
Yeah, of course. And then as you're rolling it out, you're going to want to get to about half a centimeter thick, I would say.
I mean, you could do it, whatever thickness, that's the thickness we did. The one thing is you want to make sure that you're kind of rolling them a little uniform, because that's like another component, right?
You don't want to roll it too thin so that it burns in the oven, and then you don't want it to be too thick so that it's not too cakey.
Right. Because then, in that case, you have to adjust the temperature, the time, and then if your cookies are different sizes, some might burn and some might not.
Some might burn, and then some might be too puffy, or too chewy, or anything like that.
Because what happened with our first batch?
With our first batch, when we put them in the oven, we had cooked them for a little bit too long, and they became way too crispy on the sides, and they were a little too dry at the end.
Yeah.
But with the dough that we have here, this is with the lard. As you can see, as we rolled it out, it was very smooth, and it seems consistent all the way throughout.
Do you want to try to cut it and see how it cuts?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We can even do that if we want.
And then we're going to take our cutter, and just as a little test, we're going to cut a butterfly. And you're just going to want to press down and maybe wiggle it around a little bit. And when it comes up, remove the excess around.
So the dough on this one, you can see it's more softer in look, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very soft and very easy to work with.
Yeah.
And yeah, there we go.
So there's our lard.
And that is the lard.
Nice.
All right, next up we are going to move on to the vegetable oil. Okay, now we're going to start rolling it out. And as you can first see with this one, it's starting to break apart a lot more than the other one, than the lard.
Right, the color is even.
Oh yeah, the color
like deeper.
Is even a deeper kind of brown.
A little more yellowy.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was oily. It was definitely a
very
different experience
oily
than I've ever had with them. Yeah. Nice.
All right, and you're just going to try to get the same thickness throughout, or all throughout.
Right. And let us know if you try to use different oils, but let us know what difference you find if you use different liquids too. Because although we're just using fats in this experiment, you can experiment with this in so many different ways.
So as we can see, this one is just a little bit more cracked and not as smooth, and still very oily and has a lot of moisture to it.
And I will say, when we were making it though, it was like pretty easy to mix up though. It wasn't even like we didn't have to keep adding as much flour as I said we did with the first one to get it off of our hands. It was because of, I think, just the way the oil is, right? And that one, that's just the fat in it was different for us. And so it was easier to mix up, but not easier to roll and cut.
Yeah, it took a lot easier to get it all mixed together because it wasn't sticking to our hands as bad. But yeah, like you were saying, it did prove to be a little harder to roll out and cut and then transfer. But we're gonna cut another butterfly. Go around. excess. And as you can see, there's our butterfly.
Right on.
All right, and last but not least, we have the butter.
And so the experience with the butter one, for me at least, right, you could talk about it more too, was it was kind of more closer to like the vegetable one, the same with the mixing.
It was pretty much the same as the vegetable oil. It's a little less oily, but it was still a lot easier to mix it all together because it wouldn't stick to our hands as much as the lard.
Right.
This one is a little bit hard from being in the fridge for a while, but I think we will be okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And then it was the same thing. We'll see when she rolls here.
Oh yeah.
You'll kind of see the similarity, that it had that more cracked appeal to it.
Well, now as it
Quite as strong.
is rolled out right now, after being in the fridge, it does seem to be rolling out a bit smoother.
It does actually.
Way smoother than it was before.
When it was nice and hot.
When we were doing it before, it was cracking a lot, and it was really hard to keep the dough all in one place, and it was just breaking apart into way too many sections, and it was difficult to roll out.
So that's something else we could play with too, right? Trying to bake one maybe like that you refrigerate and then roll out, and then maybe bake one in your hot kitchen, in the heat of the kitchen when things are rolling, and see what difference you get in them.
But we're gonna take our butterfly, stamp one more.
Nice.
And before, when we were originally rolling it out, it was very, very hard to keep the cookies all together after we had stamped them all out. When we were picking them up and transferring them onto the tray, they would break and they were falling apart and cracking, but now it seems like they are just perfectly smooth.
All right, so
All right.
Eva has nicely laid out all of our different examples. You have lard,
Vegetable oil and butter.
Yes, in that order. And so here's a good look. You can take a look of it in without it being cooked, just the raw dough, and you can just see the difference. I mean, the butter, right, and the lard aren't too dissimilar. The color's a little bit different, but
Yeah, it definitely got a bit darker still, but they still look pretty the same kind of smooth texture.
right? Definitely. And so now that we've seen what it looks like, we've seen what the dough looks like, we do have some examples of each of them to show to you all. And we're going to break them open, show them to you guys so we can see the difference that way. And then we'll also have a close-up look that you guys will see here.
All right, now you can see that we have got the final product right in front of us. This is the final product of the lard, and it still looks pretty smooth, and it came out a little crispy on the edges, which is nice, and it doesn't look too puffy. It looks the right kind of thickness, and yeah, I would say that one's pretty solid. And then with the vegetable oil one, here is the final product of that. Same thing with the lard, it still looks pretty smooth and same consistency throughout, and the thickness, it stayed up nicely. And then lastly with the butter, you can see that with the final product, the cookie kind of came out a little bit cakier than the other ones.
Flakier, right?
It came out a little bit flakier and more cracked. You can see that it's not as smooth as the other ones, and that was just the result of the dough
Right.
when we rolled it out yesterday.
And so we have, although we did 3 different types. We did bake them all for 20 minutes. We cut ours a little bit thicker, which is what we realized after our first batch. So that was like our test. We did our first batch with lard. That was a good test batch for us. And then we were able to make our improvements and be like, okay, we're going to keep it at 350. That's the temperature. And then we ended up baking them. It says 10 to 15 minutes, depending on your thickness, right? So for us, we ended up going 20 minutes just because we wanted our cookie to be a little bit thicker. And it was crazy. I mean, when they were in the oven, for me, I noticed, they all, at first when we put them in, right? Like, these two were definitely super oily when we first put them on, but as they started to bake, it was crazy. They did all look the same, like about 10 minutes in. So we did do a check, like 10 minutes in, right?
Yeah, and the butter ones looked like they rised a little bit more, and they looked a bit thicker than the other ones when they were in the oven.
Right? This one even definitely looks the thinnest to me, the vegetable.
Yeah.
Too, right?
And that could be the oiliness of it.
I mean, there's improvements we can make if we want to make them again, right? But we're going to test it. We're going to crack each one to see what the inside of each of them looks like as well. Here we have our
lard.
How does it look to you?
It looks
a
very
little
a little flaky, but just as flaky as a biscochito should be.
Right? And so we'll see in the close-up shot what we can see that's different under the microscope. If we can notice any differences there. Next we have our veggie oil, or vegetable oil.
All right.
And it's still relatively flaky, but I would be interested to see if under the microscope if it looks more like condensed, you know?
Yeah.
Not as fluffy as the other two.
Either more condensed
kind of appears that way?
Yeah, more condensed or more broken apart.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, and lastly we have our butter.
Ooh,
and that one that one broke apart very smoothly. So we can tell that it is a bit cakier. Yeah, it is a bit fluffier.
That's awesome. Yeah, the butter surprised me. It was good. Yeah, it was pretty good. And taste-wise, right? Taste-wise, the taste wasn't too different to me, right? It wasn't too off. They all kind of tasted the same. Like, you couldn't tell if you put them all back together. It's kind of hard to spot the difference. The butter, it was definitely the one, right? That
stuck out the most. Yeah, and the one that you can like tell apart from the others.
Right. So experiment at home, try different things. Whether it's with this recipe or other recipes you have, don't be afraid to put a maker twist on it, right? And just make it your own. Change things up, try different things, investigate what elements you can change within different recipes. And have fun
of course.
with it. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.